Defending your argument in academic writing is an important skill to learn. Some of the techniques are considered advanced writing skills. However, learning how to defend your argument well will improve your essay writing. Sometimes when you're writing an argumentative essay, you may feel that your essay position is strong, but you're not sure how to refute or dismantle the opposing viewpoints. The first tip is to be sure to acknowledge the opposing argument. Whether you agree with the opposite opinion or not, you should acknowledge that there may be a different way of thinking about this topic. You also will want to identify the core of the argument to help you know how to defend your own position. What are the main points that the others are using to defend their argument? Once you've identified those, you will want to present your point of view. There are several types of rebuttals or ways to challenge the other opinions. In this video, we will talk about 3 different ways. The first is direct refutation. The second is developing counterarguments. And the third is by using concessions. If you need help writing effective essays, be sure to check out some of these other videos that I have on the channel about different aspects of writing an essay. Welcome to Writing better sentences, paragraphs, and essays. There are several ways to deconstruct opposing arguments. The first way is to directly refute the argument. Refute means to prove a statement is incorrect. There are several ways that you can do this, including exposing logical fallacies, addressing the evidence directly, as well as unveiling hidden assumptions. Let's look at each of these in more detail. A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning that causes an argument to be invalid or weak. Some common logical fallacies include these. Appeals to authority. This fallacy is assuming something is true because a famous or respected person says something. For example, you may find some information that states something like this. Simon X, a prominent biologist, claims that, and then there is a claim. However, you know there is evidence that this may not always be true. Now, just because Simon is a well-known biologist, saying these things may not necessarily mean that it's true, which is what you will expose in your essay argument. Another type of common fallacy is something we call ad hominem attacks. This is used when someone argues that the person saying something is a bad person, so what they say must be wrong. For example, a source that you are using may have said something like this. Simon B. has been known to collaborate with unconventional sources, so this information cannot be taken seriously. You would then in your essay point out that the information could still be true, even though the person stating it may not be trustworthy. One more common fallacy is what we call a straw man argument. This is misrepresenting a conclusion or a logical argument in order to counter it, to argue against something different from what the other person said. Straw man arguments often use exaggeration or oversimplifying information, often taking things out of context, as well as twisting and changing what the original person said. Simon X states that more money should be spent on studying B, clearly showing that he is against studying C. But Simon X did not say anything about C. Here's another example. Susan Y promotes that we should invest more in research of M, suggesting that we indiscriminately fund companies without any accountability. This is an example of twisting and changing what the person originally said. You will expose these different kinds of fallacies in your essay to prove that there are some problems with what the person with the opposite opinion believes. The second way to deconstruct opposing arguments is to address the evidence directly. You'll want to analyze the validity and relevance of the supporting evidence that the opposing argument presents. You should highlight any gaps or inconsistencies in the argument and of supporting evidence that they present. You will then want to add your own research to refute the evidence. The third way to deconstruct opposing arguments is to unveil hidden assumptions. Sometimes you will need to challenge implicit assumptions or biases that the other writer shows. Mr. K is only 30 years old, therefore he cannot be experienced enough to handle this job. This opinion seems to imply a bias that a 30-year-old is not old enough to have enough experience to handle this particular job. But this may not be true of all 30-year-olds. Here's another example. The research was conducted by 20 different researchers, so the results must be valid. This also assumes that if 20 different researchers found the same information, it must be true. However, if you have information that proves this not to be true, it would be an assumption that needs to be challenged. Let's now look at the second way that you can write a rebuttal in your essay. The second type of rebuttal is learning how to craft compelling counterarguments. You've shown that the opposing side has information that may be incorrect. Now you need to show from your perspective why your ideas have more validity. You need to build your own evidence to prove your point. You should always present alternative interpretations to the opposing opinion. To do this, there are 3 different ways that you can appeal to your reader. Ethos, which is using an ethical appeal. Pathos, which appeals to emotions. And logos, which appeals to logic, such as facts and statistics. Let's look at ethos first. Ethos uses credibility, trust, character, and ethics to convince the reader that your ideas are more valid than the opposing arguments. To do this, you will want to use credible sources for your evidence. Let's compare these 2 statements. A 25-year Stanford study has found that exercising 3 times a week is a necessity for healthy living. After exercising for 6 months, I have found that I feel healthier. To help build credibility of your information, I think you can see that it would be better to use a 25-year Stanford study as your evidence, as opposed to what your experience has been. You also want to use qualifying arguments, using words that make things less absolute. Do not use words like always or everyone. You do not want to say things like everyone knows that, or it is always true that. It would be better to say things like this. Research suggests, several studies show. Pathos, on the other hand, appeals to emotions such as fear, anger, or happiness. Eating these healthy foods may be more expensive, but it will give you more self-esteem and peace of mind. Writing something like this appeals to the reader's happiness, or in this case, peace of mind. The accident resulted in numerous casualties, which greatly impacted the community. Utilizing these methods could result in catastrophic consequences. Using words that cause people to have an emotional response is one good way to convince the reader that your argument has validity. Logos appeals to logic, which uses facts and statistics. By using logic, you can support claims with evidence and reasoning. The thesis statement that is followed by body paragraphs explaining about the thesis statement is one way of using logos. You always want to use statistics and facts to prove your point of view. You also want to use inductive and reductive reasoning. By inductive reasoning, we mean moving from specific information to more generalizations to show probable conclusions. By using a specific example, you can show that a broader idea could also be the result of a certain issue. Deductive reasoning, on the other hand, is when you present a very broad idea and lead it to some detailed information to prove your conclusion. Both of these methods are using logos, or appealing to logic. The final method for defending your argument is to use concessions. Concession means that you acknowledge that the opposing side has valid points. By admitting limitations in your argument, you build ethos with your readers. People will be more willing to read your information because it shows that you have maturity and a thorough understanding of the topic. After conceding, you'll write your rebuttal and counterarguments, showing why you disagree with the other argument. You might write something like this. While it is true that it often lacks sufficient evidence, which can be a problem for many researchers. So when you're defending your argument, you first need to acknowledge the opposing argument, and you need to also identify the core of the argument so that you can use one of these types of rebuttals to show why you disagree with the other people's opinion. I hope that you found this video helpful in knowing how to defend your argument against another person's opinion or theory. Happy writing!